Our story begins with a peculiar family living on the outskirts of the kingdom of Diller. Lloyd Bland was the husband, and three extraordinary women shared his life. The first was Eyeballs, who in reality was the most fearsome Dragon Queen. The second was Alice, the family's eldest daughter and the daughter of the Demon King, a figure Lloyd had slain. Lastly, there was Sophia, the second daughter, known as the Witch of Calamity, a prodigious sorceress. This was no ordinary family, they were a creation of God's deception. Today, we dive into the fascinating history of this bizarre yet incredible family. The story kicks off with Lloyd emerging victorious in an epic battle against the Demon King, leaving him drenched in blood and hailed as a fearsome and skilled warrior. With just one hand, he single-handedly defeated the Demon King's entire army of thousands. The Demon King himself admits that Lloyd wielded power unlike anything found in humankind, a force that rivaled, if not surpassed, that of the gods. He warns Lloyd that after this victory, he'll have nowhere left to go, no purpose to cling to, and that the world will soon fear him, seeing him as a threat to their very existence. The Demon King insists that Lloyd must be killed as a great and noble warrior, and if Lloyd is prepared for that fate, the MC doesn't hesitate. The Demon King declares that Lloyd's chosen path will be paved with his own death, and that should be enough to satisfy his destiny. In response, Lloyd bids the Demon King Duke a solemn farewell. Duke, in turn, acknowledges Lloyd's bravery before meeting his end at the hands of the protagonist. Two girls stood witness to the death of the Demon King, one of them the princess and daughter of the fallen ruler, who had just watched Lloyd take her father's life. Her guardian stepped forward, urging her to stay back, warning that if the warrior discovered them, it could mean disaster. The princess was the last hope for her people, the sole survivor of her lineage, especially now that the Demon King and his army had been defeated. She had to stay strong. As she watched Lloyd walk away from the battlefield after killing the Demon King Duke, the princess silently vowed to one day track him down and make him pay for what he had done. Half a year later, in the kingdom of Diller, within the Grand Palace, the citizens and courtiers begin showering the protagonist, Lloyd, with praise. They celebrate him as the brave and heroic warrior who saved the entire kingdom. They marvel at how, despite his humble beginnings in poverty, he rose to become someone extraordinary and immensely talented. The young women in the palace gossip among themselves, wondering if he's single and daydreaming about becoming his future wife. Lloyd stands before the king, bowing respectfully. The king congratulates him on his victory over the Demon King, urging him to lift his head high. He asks if the battle against the Demon King was as triumphant as they had hoped. Lloyd nods, humbly agreeing, and expresses that it was an honor to receive such praise for simply fulfilling his duty. After a long period of recovery, thanks to the king's support and the generous rewards he received, Lloyd finally healed from the aftermath of the battle. The king assures him that what they've given is the least they could offer to the hero who saved the entire kingdom. He then reveals the real reason he summoned Lloyd to the palace that day. He wants to grant the protagonist a portion of his own territory. Lloyd is visibly confused by this unexpected offer. The king declares that in his name he will bestow upon the brave Lloyd the title of Earl. The room erupts in applause as the boarder and everyone in the palace celebrate the birth of a new Earl. Amid the dark and tense atmosphere, Lloyd unveils another layer to the unfolding story. He recounts being gifted a mansion, a generous gesture overshadowed by grim news from the eastern region of Ro. A recent development has thrown the area into chaos. Terrifying monsters have overrun the once thriving iron mines, determined to reclaim control. The king dispatched his superior army to eliminate the threat, but tragically, none of the soldiers returned, marking the mission as a complete failure. With losses mounting, the king now turns to Lloyd, relying on his strategic mind to solve the crisis and eradicate the monstrous threat. This revelation adds a fresh twist to the narrative, weaving smaller, urgent challenges into the larger story, challenges that demand the protagonist's direct involvement. The journey ahead promises to be thrilling and perilous, especially with the looming threat of formidable enemies east of Ro. Lloyd accepts the task without hesitation. However, as soon as he steps out of the palace, the king's decision stirs unease among those around him. The territory granted to Lloyd lies in the barren borderlands, where crops struggle to grow, a lifeless and desolate place. If Lloyd were to discover the true nature of the land, he might have every reason to protest. The stakes are high and the challenges ahead are as daunting as they are unpredictable. But the king dismissed such concerns, confident that Lloyd would remain content as long as he was alive, wanting nothing more. However, it was in those very lands that the great Dragon King resided, being rumored to be immortal, capable of annihilating an entire kingdom in a single night. Even the Demon King himself had been powerless against the Dragon Queen, a true supreme ruler of the dragon race. The king knew that Lloyd, despite his strength, was likely no match for such a foe. This revelation left the king's advisor stunned, realizing the king was essentially sending his own hero to his death. The king admitted it openly. From the start, he had hoped Lloyd and the Demon King would destroy each other. But Lloyd had proven too powerful, and the world had no need for such overwhelming strength. The king's plan to eliminate the soldier who had saved the world, or destroy it if he chose, was now in motion. And yet the king refused to abandon his goal of ending the great hero's life, especially since Lloyd, the once indispensable warrior, was no longer of any use to them. A month later, Lloyd found himself traveling in a carriage through the suburbs of Rhea. It dawned on him that he had likely been quietly exiled from his own kingdom. As he surveyed the barren land, he noticed the near absence of plants and wondered if this was truly where the great monster resided, a creature that might emerge at any moment. Yet he wasn't entirely surprised. The king's fear of him had led to this: banishment to an empty, lifeless territory. Lloyd reflected that even if he were in the king's position, he might have made the same decision. This realization brought him face to face with the consequences of his past choices. He recalled the day he volunteered for the body modification experiment, driven by a desire to become a strong and respected soldier. Lloyd's parents had died early, and wherever he went, he was treated like a problem child. When he felt the world no longer needed him, his purpose began to fade. Yet he had still chosen to become an experiment, clinging to the hope that someone somewhere would find him useful. The scientists succeeded in their experiment, transforming Lloyd into not just a great exterminator, but a true warrior for his kingdom. However, they cared little about what he would become afterward. He was merely a successful experiment, nothing more. Despite some flaws, the king was pleased with what they had created using Lloyd's body. Lloyd went on to defeat the Demon King, but in doing so, he lost his reason for existing. He had been granted immense power only to be cast aside as unnecessary. Now, as he traveled through the desolate land, he couldn't help but wonder, was there any reason left for him to keep living? As Lloyd sat in the carriage, lost in thought, a voice suddenly interrupted him, pointing out the lack of grass to feed the horses in this desolate region. The driver added that the path ahead was treacherous, and that continuing further would be risky. Lloyd quickly realized the man was afraid of the monsters rumored to roam the area. Deciding not to push the driver further, Lloyd thanked him for the ride, acknowledging that he'd already come a long way thanks to his help. He stepped out of the carriage, and the driver promptly turned around and sped off. As Lloyd walked away, a loud noise echoed behind him. When the driver glanced back, he was shocked to find the hero had vanished from sight. The reason? Lloyd had already continued his journey, moving at an astonishing, almost terrifying speed, leaving nothing but dust in his wake. Meanwhile, deep inside the tunnels of Mount Rodbure, Lloyd had come prepared. He brought light equipment from the city to explore the area and face any monsters without too much trouble. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster could inhabit such a vast and foreboding place. As Lloyd ventured further into the mines, a massive dragon suddenly appeared, demanding to know why he had infiltrated its territory. The dragon introduced itself as the great Dragon King and threatened Lloyd, warning him not to pick a fight in such a reckless manner. Lloyd couldn't help but think how enormous the Dragon King was, questioning how such a colossal creature ended up in a place like this. The Dragon King, growing impatient, pressed Lloyd for answers, taunting him by asking if he was too scared to speak. Lloyd calmly replied that he had forgotten the meaning of fear long ago. He then informed the Dragon King that the mountain didn't belong to him. It was part of King Deligur's territory, and now Lloyd had claim to it. The dragon was taken aback that a human showed no fear in its presence. It warned Lloyd that if he valued his life, he should flee immediately. But Lloyd stood his ground, explaining that he was acting on orders from the king himself. The Dragon King laughed, finding Lloyd intriguing, and decided to give him a gift. Without hesitation, it launched a fiery attack directly at Lloyd's head. Yet to the dragon's shock, the attack had no effect. Lloyd explained that he was protected by an energy barrier, which only deepened the Dragon King's surprise. The protagonist even apologized, admitting that he was a rather special being. The encounter left the Dragon King both impressed and puzzled, setting the stage for an unexpected confrontation. From the very beginning, Lloyd's body had been broken, yet he stood unwavering. The Dragon King, undeterred by the failure of its fire attacks, decided to rely on its sheer physical strength to end Lloyd's life. But Lloyd effortlessly blocked the assault, leaving the Dragon King even more stunned. The dragon couldn't help but question if Lloyd was truly human, given his overwhelming power. Lloyd calmly replied that he wasn't the same as he used to be. He was no longer just a human. Dismissing the conversation as pointless, Lloyd declared that even his sword was unnecessary. Instead, he charged at the Dragon King with his bare fists. What followed was a relentless barrage of punches, each strike landing with devastating force. The Dragon King was sent flying, crashing into the walls of the massive iron mine, the impact echoing through the cavern. Lloyd's strength was undeniable, and the battle was far from over. After being overpowered, the Dragon King began to tremble, a mix of fear and shock etched across its face. Lloyd couldn't help but notice how familiar those eyes looked, had lost count of how many times he'd seen that same expression directed at him. Calmly, Lloyd asked if the dragon intended to leave the area for good, assuring it that if it departed peacefully, there'd be no need for further conflict. But the Dragon King defiantly declared it would never surrender to a human, daring Lloyd to kill it instead. Lloyd, however, pressed further, questioning why the Dragon King wasn't fighting seriously. After all, its fire attacks and tail strikes were easy for him to dodge or deflect, especially in the confined space of the iron mine. This realization struck Lloyd. The dragon wasn't actually trying to kill him. In fact, it seemed more like the Dragon King was simply trying to scare people away from its territory rather than take their lives. The dragon's actions were less about destruction and more about protection, a subtle but important distinction. The Dragon King hesitated, then snapped back, accusing Lloyd of being delirious. It insisted that Lloyd should just end its life once and for all. But instead of complying, Lloyd turned away, explaining that the king's orders were to kill the monster to prevent further losses. However, since the dragon hadn't caused any harm or damage to the kingdom, those orders no longer held any weight. There was no reason to carry them out. The Dragon King cried out in confusion, unable to understand why Lloyd wouldn't just kill it. After all, it knew that to humans, a dragon's body was a treasure beyond measure. It demanded to know if Lloyd didn't desire that wealth like every other human. Lloyd admitted that yes, with the dragon's body, he could amass enough wealth to buy an entire country. But he didn't care about such things. He had already killed enough in his life, and his hands were already stained with blood. He had no desire to cause more unnecessary death. The Dragon King grew intrigued and asked what had happened to Lloyd to make him think this way. Lloyd explained that he was a warrior who, on the king's orders, had single-handedly faced and defeated the Demon King's army. Now he was seen as a threat to all of humanity. He knew the order to kill the Dragon King was just another ploy by the king to eliminate another powerful being, and in doing so get rid of Lloyd himself. The Dragon King questioned why Lloyd had accepted the order if he was aware of the king's intentions. Lloyd replied simply, he had nothing else. No love, no family. All he had was his power. He knew that if he wasn't the weapon they needed, there was no reason for him to keep living. And that realization was something he hated deeply. His existence had become a tool, and without purpose, he felt hollow. Lloyd decided to leave the iron mine, telling the Dragon King it could stay there if it wished. He bid it farewell, adding that he couldn't care less what the dragon did with its life from that point on. But just as he turned to leave, a bright light suddenly shone behind him. The dragon's voice called out, telling him to wait. When Lloyd turned back to see what was happening, he was met with an unexpected sight. A girl stood where the dragon had been. She introduced herself as Iblis, claiming she had a suggestion for him. Lloyd was stunned. The mighty Dragon King had transformed into a girl. Iblis asked the protagonist for his name. When she learns it's Lloyd, she surprises him by asking him to live with her from that moment on. Lloyd, caught off guard by the strange request, just stares at her, leaving Iblis confused by his reaction. She smirks and teases him, suggesting that he must have been enchanted by her beauty, as no man could resist her stunning looks. But Lloyd quickly shuts her down, explaining that he was actually thinking about how a massive dragon like her ended up trapped in the iron mine and how she managed to shapeshift. Iblis is stunned. She presses him, asking if he felt anything for her. No spark of attraction, no rush of emotion, nothing like what most men feel in her presence. Lloyd, trying to be polite, lies and says maybe he did feel something, but Iblis sees right through him. She realizes he's completely unaffected by her beauty, and it hits her hard. She can't believe it. Her charm, her allure, none of it moved the heart of this brave warrior standing before her. Putting that aside, Lloyd turns to Iblis and asks her what she meant about living together. Iblis hesitates, her confidence wavering as she mentions that Lloyd doesn't have a family. She stumbles over her words, too embarrassed to say it outright again, which makes Lloyd give up on pressing her and start to walk away. But before he can leave, Iblis grabs his arm, stopping him in his tracks. She finally musters the courage to say it clearly. She wants to become his partner. Lloyd, without missing a beat, accepts her proposal without a second thought. His straightforwardness catches Iblis off guard. She's surprised by how simple he is about it. She presses him, asking if he even understands what she means by partner. Lloyd calmly confirms that they've essentially become husband and wife. Iblis, flustered, explains that according to ancient dragon legends, those who are kind enough to help a dragon must either receive the dragon's loyalty or become their partner. Lloyd, unfazed, shrugs it off and says it's fine. He casually mentions there's a mansion nearby and suggests they live there from now on. Iblis is left speechless, realizing just how effortlessly Lloyd has accepted this life-changing arrangement. Iblis stops Lloyd and asks him to wait. Before he makes his final decision, she wants to share her life story and the ancient tales of her past. She begins by explaining that long ago, dragons once thrived in this land. One day, she stumbled upon a human who had fainted and, in a rare moment of kindness, decided to help him. The human recovered, and instead of fearing her, he thanked her and offered friendship. This led to Iblis visiting the human's kingdom, where a temporary peace and bond between dragons and humans was formed. For a time, the two races coexisted harmoniously. The dragons protected human caravans, and the kingdom grew prosperous and peaceful. Days passed quickly, and everything seemed perfect until one fateful day. As usual, the humans offered the dragons the minerals they loved to eat. But this time, something was wrong. After consuming the minerals, the dragons lost consciousness. When Iblis awoke, her entire species had been slaughtered. The humans, now prosperous and no longer needing the dragons' protection, had poisoned them to seize their land and resources. The once thriving dragon territory became human property, soaked in the blood of her kind. Iblis admits that her memories of that time are hazy and painful. All she remembers is waking up to a world engulfed in flames, her rage burning everything in sight. She wonders if the humans' plan to exterminate the dragons was common knowledge, or if even the children involved were unaware of the atrocities they were part of. The fire she unleashed consumed the forest, leaving the land barren and lifeless, the very ground they now stand on. Since then, Iblis has been known as the cruel Dragon King. Her greatest sin, she believes, was failing to protect her people, including those who weren't directly tied to her. To atone, she secluded herself, living a solitary life of punishment and reflection. Centuries pass, and throughout that time, she wondered what fate awaited her. She hoped someone powerful enough to end her life would appear, but instead, Lloyd chose to spare her. Now, tired of her self-imposed isolation, Iblis turns to Lloyd, the brave warrior who, like her, has lived a life marked by solitude and bloodshed. She asks him if, since he's decided not to kill her, they could at least live together, finding solace in each other's company. Once again, Lloyd agrees without a second thought, leaving Iblis stunned by his simplicity. She asks him if he seriously considered her story, to which Lloyd responds that fulfilling the wishes of others is his sole reason for living. If this is what Iblis needs, he'll dedicate his life to making it happen. He casually calls her his wife, and the words hit Iblis so deeply that tears well up in her eyes. Overwhelmed with emotion, she calls him her husband in return. But the emotional moment doesn't last long. Within seconds, Lloyd points out how quickly Iblis' personality shifted from her intimidating dragon form to her more human demeanor. Iblis admits she was only pretending to be fierce to scare him off. After centuries of isolation, she's grown antisocial and awkward around people, unsure how to interact properly. Lloyd accepts her explanation without question and suggests they leave the Iron Mines. Before Iblis can ask where they're going, Lloyd scoops her up in his arms and dashes out of the mines at an incredible speed. As they race through the landscape, Iblis asks where they're headed. Lloyd simply replies that they're almost at their new home. When they arrive, Iblis is shocked to see a massive, impressive place waiting for them. Lloyd suggests they pick a room to settle in and starts calling her Iblis as a nickname. Iblis, however, can't help but complain about Lloyd's perpetually expressionless face. She teases him, asking if he could show a little more affection now and then. Still, she's content for now. After all, they're husband and wife, and she's determined to make him bring a smile to her face more often from here on out. Later, in the bedroom of Lloyd's mansion, he takes a moment to rest, reflecting on how eventful the day had been. He can't quite wrap his head around the fact that he now has a family and wonders if this could be his new purpose in life. As he mulls over the word family, a memory surfaces. Someone from his past, someone he cared for deeply, but couldn't protect. The thought lingers, and he questions whether he truly deserves something like this now. Just as he's lost in his thoughts, Iblis quietly slips into Lloyd's room. With a playful yet sincere tone, she suggests that they sleep together that night, catching Lloyd off guard and adding another layer of complexity of his already swirling emotions.